Hello, welcome to Prime Business with me, Emma Davis. Let's settle for the details. Some 8 foreign trade associations have expressed grave concerns about the proposed legislative instrument that restricts the imports of 24 goods into Ghana. According to them, the LI has the potential to strain trade relations and create tensions with Ghana's key trading partners such as the US, UK, and the European Union. The trade associations claim they see scenarios where the resulting higher prices of production and distortions to the competition could create a more challenging environment as a result. The trade associations include the American Chamber of Commerce Ghana, the UK Ghana Chamber of Commerce, Canada Ghana Chamber of Commerce, and Ghana South Africa Chamber of Commerce. Here is Simon Maggi, Executive Secretary of the American Chamber of Commerce Ghana.
We are concerned that fundamentally the government will be choosing who gets to be an importer into the country, and these have the potential to distort competition that flow from the break of international trade norms. Further, the measure does not take into account some practical aspects of international trade and how businesses plan their operations. Suppliers assess and choose who they think is qualified to serve as an authorized distributor or representative or importer in a foreign market. A committee in Ghana selecting and limiting importers through a permitting process would distort this natural and competitive aspect of international business. That is a primary concern for us.
Let's go on Zoom and speak to Head of Trade Services at UK Ghana Chamber of Commerce, Sarah Adelaide Odamte. Thank you very much, Sarah Adelaide, for joining us. What are the main reasons for the opposition of the LI restricting the importation of some selected items?
Well, thank you for the question and good evening to your viewers. In answer to your question, I can say there's the probability that trade relations with key trading partners such as the UK, the US, and the EU would be strained, and that could also result in creating among these trading partners. There are existing trade partnership agreements between the UK, the US, and the EU, and this could be affected. Another reason I can cite is that this could also result in higher cost of production generally, and definitely distortions to competition, leading to a more challenging business environment.
The minister has explained that the idea behind the LI is to protect Ghanaian manufacturers and producers. Would you not describe the LI as a good policy, which would in turn help create jobs?
It is difficult to say, but what I can say is that our various businesses operate in multiple international markets, and they've had an opportunity to observe some specific unintended and far-ranging consequences from similar policies attempted in other countries.
Okay. What then are your recommendations as you oppose the LI?
First of all, we commend the Ministry of Trade and Industry for undertaking public consultation on this proposed draft regulation. That was a step in the right direction to gather stakeholder sentiments. As a recommendation, the Ministry of Trade could consider other means to increase Ghana's competitiveness. Public consultations such as the one that they have embarked on will definitely be the first step.
Before you go, what will be your reaction if the LI is reintroduced to Parliament and passed?
Well, the Ministry of Trade and Industry in good faith sought stakeholder feedback on this draft LI. So we believe for the best outcome for all stakeholders involved.
Okay. Then fingers crossed as government makes a decision. Thank you very much, Sarah Adelaide Odamte. She is the Head of Trade Services at the UK Ghana Chamber of Commerce. Moving on, government has been urged to repackage some flagship programs to garner attention from foreign investors. While expressing optimism about the $400 million support from the World Bank to Ghana, partner at Deloitte, Yao Lartey, suggested that government must take a re-look at its programs targeted at the poor and vulnerable to retain donor support and boost investor confidence.
You listen to the IMF team. What they said was that some of this money cannot just come in to support our budget, but they are dedicated towards supporting specific programs, which is a good thing. Because when you do go to the international market to borrow, there is no direction as to where you put the money. But there's specific budgetary support with specific program objectives. So you are putting in specific sectors that will help you increase productivity, help you restore economic stability. So I think this is good news for us, and we should embrace it. What I'm worried about is the delay, particularly in getting parliamentary approval for the concessionary loan facility. Concessionary loan is better than the commercial facility, as I said. And so if you can accelerate the process of getting the approval from cabinet and then parliament, it will help. A lot of the donor communities that we spoke to or we interacted prior to us signing on the IMF program were clear that an IMF program alone cannot take us out of the economic challenge that we had at the time. So just signing onto an IMF program and getting $3 billion was not sufficient to take us out of the economic challenges that we were going through. And so once you sign onto the IMF program, you restore economic stability, you ensure fiscal discipline. And when you ensure economic stability and work towards fiscal discipline, you get donor support because the donor community come on board to help support specific programs. So my advice to government is that this is the time for us to revisit some of our flagship programs, repackage them, and get donor funding to support these programs. We have some very good programs like Infrastructure for Poverty Alleviation or Poverty Eradication Projects, the IPEP program. We had Planting for Food and Jobs. We had Obatampa Cares program. We've gone silent on this program. We are not emphasizing them as we used to. But we have to restructure some of these programs and repackage them and sell them to the donor community. Because now you have loanable funds, you have grants that are available to support the IMF program and support government budgets. So what government should do now is to now repackage some of the programs, particularly programs that are aimed at supporting the poor and the vulnerable. And the new Minister of Finance mentioned, I read somewhere, that he's committed to programs that are supporting the poor and the vulnerable society. So we should be able to repackage some of our programs that will support the poor and the vulnerable in society.
Meanwhile, partner at Deloitte Ghana, Yao Lartey, has lauded President Akufo-Addo's call to withdraw at least 30% of all public funds and other assets kept in foreign banks and financial institutions. According to him, that's an option to help ensure resources exported from Africa. He's, however, worried African countries are not united enough to achieve it.
There are some statistics that I recently came across when I attended the mining event recently in Africa. And you realize that it is not just about the reserves that governments or African governments are keeping outside the continent, but even the funds that we need to invest in strategic sectors. I'll give you a very good example. So Africa has 1/5 of the world's population. So about 20% of the world's population is in Africa. Africa has 30% of the world resources, natural resources, 30%. But what is interesting is that Africa only gives 2% of the resources or the capital that's required to invest in these resources. So what it means is that Africa is a ground for exploitation rather than a ground for investment. So all the exploitation that's happening in Africa, the monies are taken out, and only a portion, that's about 2% or less than 5%, that are kept on the continent. So it means that it's not only reserves, but even in other sectors of the economy, money that are needed for investment, for expansion, for job creation, are all kept outside the continent. So I think it's a very good idea. What we need to do is, in Africa, we do not have a united front. So some of these proposals, you only speak to them, but if you don't have a united front, if you look at the Francophone African countries, a lot of them keep their reserves obviously in France. And so when you ask them or when you go to the table to speak to them, the question is, are they also willing to follow through, come to terms with us, in the Anglophone, Lusophone, and other continents or other colleagues within the continent to come with the same principle, work towards the same objectives. Because we have divergent objectives and some of them do not help. So I think the very good idea, it's going to help us if we're going to keep a lot of the reserves on the continent. But the problem is we are not united, and the African continent is not united in arriving at some of these things.
Moving on, the average unemployment rate in Ghana for the first 3 quarters of 2023 was 14.7%, with the rate among females consistently higher than males. That's according to the Ghana Labour Statistics. According to the Ghana Statistical Service, the sharp increase in the unemployment rate of females between the 4th quarter of 2022 and the 1st quarter of 2023 has culminated in a wider unemployment gender gap in 2023 compared to 2022. More in this report.
So in terms of what we've done, as I indicated, this is a quarterly panel survey. It's nationally representative, regionally representative, and also the representative for our urban rural classification. The basis, the sampling frame for the 10,800 that we got was from the 2021 population and housing census. Let's keep in mind, let's leave here with not the population of Ghana, which is in excess of 31 million persons, but the population of only those 15 years and older, which is around 19 million. That is the denominator for the conversation. And also the reference period for this conversation is 7 days preceding the day of the interview. So questions around unemployment, we asked, in the last 7 days, did you work? So that is the reference period for the conversation. We have been successful in maintaining a good response rate across the last 4 quarters, that is from the last quarter of 2022 to the 3rd quarter of 2023. We started replacement in the 3rd quarter of 2023. That is why you see the number of households increasing between the 2nd quarter of 2023 and the 3rd quarter of 2023. So as I indicated, the findings are put into 3 broad categories. I'm going to start with the findings on the labor force characteristics. So the first thing we share with you is, think about the constituents of the labor force status. We distinguish between the constituents of the labor force status and the labor force. The labor force, as we indicated, consists of the 2 of the statuses, that is employed and unemployed. The labor force status consists of 3 categories: the employed, unemployed, and those outside the labor force, but 15 years and older. So across the last 7 quarters, that is between the 1st quarter of 2022 and the 3rd quarter of 2023, we see that we have reduced the persons outside the labor force from 4.95 million to 4.51 million persons. Because this is a set, once people are leaving the labor, are moving out of outside the labor force, they should find their way in either the employment status or the unemployment status. So the 440 persons that in the first 3 quarters of 2023 exited the outside the labor force, over 60% of them, precisely about 250,000 of them, went into the employed status, and the remaining into the unemployed status. So from these 3 constituents point of view, we see a reduction in outside the labor force of persons, approximately 440,000 persons, and because this is a set of 3 categories of people, you need to find where they are going to.
We apologize for that earlier. There was a mishap with our sound, but that's how we part company tonight on Prime Business. I am Emma Davis. For more business news, do log on to myjoyonline.com. Up next is Prime Sports with Razak Musbah, but I leave you with international business. Have a good evening.